If you belong to the Messiah, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. Galatians 3:29. A person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is of the heart by the Spirit. Romans 2:29. And before we were born again, we were separated from the Messiah, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenant of promise. Ephesians 2:12. Our participation in Israel's identity and promises is central to Paul's understanding of the gospel. But so is our participation in Israel's story. The Exodus is the story of how God rescued the children of Israel from bondage, and it is the identity-making story for the Israelites. Since we have become Israelites through Christ, we must also embark on the Exodus journey. Let me show you how Paul tells the church's Exodus story in Romans 6 through 8. First, Paul says we were baptized into Christ to mark our deliverance from slavery. We know from 1 Corinthians 10 that Paul compares the Red Sea crossing to baptism when he recounts how the children of Israel were baptized into Moses when they traveled through the Red Sea. Next, Israel arrived at Mount Sinai to receive the law. This is why the next step in Romans is Paul's discourse on the Mosaic Law Code in Romans 7. Look at how many times Paul mentions the law, and there are actually many more instances than this. He opens Romans 7 by discussing our marriage to Christ. This is fascinating because prophets like Hosea and Ezekiel believed God married the children of Israel at Mount Sinai. Later rabbis compared the huppah, the marriage canopy at weddings, to the cloud that hovered over Mount Sinai when God was united to his people in a marriage covenant. In speaking of the Shekinah, the next step of the journey was to follow the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night toward the Promised Land. This is the stage of the journey in which the Christian currently finds himself. Paul chooses his language carefully to link the Spirit with the Shekinah. The Spirit dwells within you the same way the Shekinah indwelled the tabernacle, and we are led by the Spirit of God just as the children of Israel were led through the wilderness by the Shekinah. We can choose to follow the Spirit to the Promised Land, or we can return to bondage in Egypt, the decision every Christian has to make. The next stage of the Exodus journey in Romans is the land inheritance. We are heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. Only for us the Promised Land is not a strip of ground in the Middle East, but the entire creation, which will be set free from death and decay whenever we appear with Christ as stewards over the cosmos, the way Adam was always intended to be. At that time, our enemies must suffer defeat, just as entering the land coincided with the defeat of the Canaanites. This is why at this part of the narrative, Paul says we are more than conquerors, and then lists off the enemies to be defeated whenever we enter the Promised Land. For us, these are the cosmic Canaanites, who will be forever disarmed whenever our Exodus journey has reached its culmination at the second coming of Christ. Giving credit where it's due, the Exodus narrative substructure of Romans comes from N.T. Wright, whose ideas on Paul can be accessed in one of his shorter books like Paul in Fresh Perspective, or his longer 2-volume work, Paul and the Faithfulness of God.